With Jack Doyle expected to take more of a blocking role, we're looking for more work for Mo Alley Cox. But should you be adding Kylen Granson to your Dynasty rosters? All that more today on the Dynasty newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chad Parsons. Chad, are you adding Kylen Granson to your Dynasty rosters?
Oh, he's been one of my favorites, Adam. Yeah, absolutely. Deeper special. You got to be patient with tight ends. If you're expecting a big impact in year one, that's not the position to go towards. But Granson's one of my favorite in that Jonnu Smith role. And yeah, I'm digging it, because they have questions abound in their passing game. So I'm pretty excited about this new look Colts offense.
Yeah, Kylen Granson's a little bit of a smaller guy, but he's going to have more of a receiving role in that offense. So the blurb here is Jack Doyle may be used more in the run game this season because of the retirement of left tackle Anthony Costanzo, according to Zach Kiefer of The Athletic. So if we're expecting Jack Doyle to do more blocking, and part of Jack Doyle's value in past years has been his relationships with the quarterbacks, specifically Andrew Luck at times. So I'm not looking for any work from Jack Doyle. It's just that these three guys could be nitpicking from each other. But if we're going to have Kylen Granson looking so good in camp, apparently, he's only competing with Mo Alley Cox, who hasn't been much more than a touchdown threat at times.
Yeah, and let's face it, Mo Alley Cox has been a great story, kind of like a Donald Parham or something like that. He's getting later in the developmental curve. So I just think that a lot of times we gravitate towards these guys and think they might be Darren Waller splashes later on, and it really doesn't materialize. So I would say you got to be careful, especially one tight end formats, that diving in too many in terms of these flash and dash players that like Mo Alley Cox makes 5 plays a year, and we all of a sudden think he's going to be the lead back. So they invested in an early day 3 pick here, and Jack Doyle, I mean, let's face it, he saw the 3rd most targets on that team among tight ends last year. So, and it was all about volume for him. He's a blocker. And I just think, who's their wide receiver 1? Do they have a dominant alpha wide receiver 1?
Well, T.Y.'s getting paid to be the wide receiver 1. He just has to last.
Exactly. But he's venturing above 30, he's slowing down. He's not a 4.3x guy anymore, I don't think. So we'll see. I think it's going to be a lot of run game, but these tight ends, multiple tight end fronts and the move tight end, I really do see a Jonnu Smith, Gerald Everett type player out of Kylen Granson in a best case.
Sure, yeah, one of those smaller guys, and he's bordering on relevant draft status. He was a 4th round pick, so it's not like he's going to be, we're afraid that he's not going to make the roster or anything like that. He's got the chance to compete, and like we said, if he's just competing with Mo Alley Cox, we talked about Noah Gray, we talked about Jacob Harris. This is another player who's probably on your waiver wires who you just add, especially if you have a taxi squad. So let's just get to the actual Kylen Granson blurb. So Kylen Granson made a strong impression during spring practices, according to Frank Wright. We knew he was a really smart guy, and he's picking up the offense really fast. This was according to Kevin Bowen at 1075 The Fan. So that's the drum beat, as Cecil so eloquently puts it. It's going to make it harder to pick him up for free, right? That always happens. You see the name, and it's like, okay, well, here comes waiver wires running the next week. But if he's still there, would you actually add him to the end of a roster?
Yeah, I think what's the format, what's the roster size are really key questions about stash tight ends. I think in general you want to be lean and mean. If it's 25-man roster to 28, we'll call that medium or average depth. But when you start venturing at 30 plus, you start looking around at running back, especially wide receiver, you don't see a lot you like. So I would say, those types of format you mentioned, if you're still trying to fill up a taxi squad, maybe you didn't draft 4, 5, 6, whatever the limit is of rookies. This is the pool you need to go into, the deeper dive of who didn't get selected in 3-4 rounds. And with Granson, I would say you do want athletic tight ends. These are the guys with big upside. And really, in the first 4 or 5 rounds that were drafted this year, you've got Kyle Pitts, you've got Jacob Harris, who you guys have talked about recently. Yeah. But beyond that, Granson's right there with everybody else in terms of his overall athleticism. He was also productive, kind of a wide receiver type player. So I'm pretty excited about him long term. The one thing I would say is have patience if you're going to stash him now. Otherwise, I wouldn't be surprised, in the early weeks of the season if someone ends up dropping him, even though they might have stashed him for 2-3 months till then.
Good point, too. All right, so SMU Mustang, Kylen Granson, go check him out. And if you're deep diving on guys like Kylen Granson with Chad and I, then you're a serious fantasy player. Serious fantasy players playing $350 contests on FFPC. So that would be the FBG Football Guys Player Championship over at FFPC. You can actually get 3 teams for 1,000, so that gets you a little bit of money off if you're going to be a degenerate like us. So go over to FFPC, join the FBG Players Championship, and play for a lot of money. So we talked about some guys long in the tooth here recently. We got to talk about AJ Green again. I know it's getting out of hand, but okay, I expect AJ to have a big year, Kyler Murray says. I know a lot of people are sleeping on him. I know a lot of things have been said about him. I'm glad he's on the team. This is from Kyle Odegaard of ArizonaCardinals.com. What are you doing with AJ Green in Dynasty?
Got to hold, Adam. These are the types of profiles. If you got them, I know it's an ugly roster spot right now, but this is the type. You can't just, we talked about Kylen Granson or some of these. Let's face it, for this year, for the next 2 years, they're dart throws. They really are, and we are trying to make the best bets possible. But we're talking about AJ Green, who has 4 seasons as a wide receiver 1, another 4 as a top 24 guy. But the last 2 years, he's completely fallen off the map. Last year, he was actually getting some work. Where's the separation? He looked like that. You start looking at a 30-plus-year-old, and it's like they look like a completely different player. Was he disinterested? He had the rookie quarterback. He starts going to T. Higgins and all these younger guys. And I kind of wonder if he's still got one season in the sun left in him, really. Because let's look over there. Rondale Moore, I love the guy. Christian Kirk, I think he's sort of leveling off on what we can expect upside-wise of being a number 1, number 2 guy. So with AJ Green, he's valued like a 4th-round rookie pick, I think. I mean, this is like complete throw-in. So you got to be really careful about cutting a guy like that. I still have some hope. Now, DeAndre Hopkins is going to funnel the ball. So that's one limitation of there really isn't a number 1 job available here. So does that mean if he has a great year, it's wide receiver 30 to 45? That's probably, but it's a bounce back. So you need to use him, though, because I don't think even if he does wide receiver 36 things, he's going to be valued any more than like a late second at most. So contender added special, but you can't let him go now just on the name value and the possibility he starts flashing a lot more than the past 2 years.
Yeah, there's a lot of dynasty philosophy that goes into keeping AJ Green on your roster right here. One thing that I want to point out is that if you're rebuilding, that doesn't mean that you have to be void of all veterans. You still have to sell at the right time. So if you have AJ Green on your roster and you're trying to do something with him right now, I ask why. Because if he had now last year, he actually was targeted at a pretty good clip. He just was massively unproductive with the targets, like historically unproductive with that many targets. And he did have a lot of uncatchable balls too. But if you watched him play, I'm not going to attest too much to the uncatchable balls. I mean, he did look like he lost a step. But as you said, Chad, I'm not selling him for like a 4th-round pick. If you get anything right now, maybe a throw-in. Like, there's no point if he can go to Arizona and 80 targets maybe. Like, that would be probably high end in my opinion with a plethora of targets there. But towards the back half of the season when AJ Green's putting up the consistent maybe 10, 11 fantasy points a week, a contender might actually pay for that. And even if it's just a third, you're not getting a third right now. So that's the time you want to try to sell AJ.
And it was a wide receiver centric offense. They love to go 3 and 4 wide, so they added him. I think they actually can, for the first time in the Cliff Kingsbury era, go 4 wide receiver. With it. Yeah. So, and outside of Hopkins, there were still over 200 wide receiver targets. So let's not pretend like you mentioned, he can't get to 75 to 100. I think that could be a reasonable wide receiver 2 role outcome here. And if Green is that, and we'll see about Rondale Moore, we'll see about Christian Kirk, Isabella's kind of off the map. So again, I think there is something here. And you kind of mentioned the calendar, which is really important. You can't go with some veteran that has almost no value. His greatest value, if there is any, is going to be getting targets, getting back on track, being a rebound player and comeback player during the year. It's July, so he can't come back. He can't rebound in July. This is about the news. And I will say, at least there are positive things here, because I know it's a lot of coach speak. There's plenty of fluff going on, but there's plenty of players you're not going to hear any positivity about. There's actually going to be some things we can parse out, in the Dynasty newsletter for negativity. Yeah. That's like, because nobody really calls out players this time of year. Oh, we don't think, Irv Smith a while back, right? I mean, Irv Smith is not going to be a breakout guy. We like Tyler Conklin. Stuff like that. pretending it doesn't exist. We still do get negative indicators here in the barren months.
We do, and no news is not always good news either. So I wanted to touch on so you got Rondell Moore hype, you have AJ Green hype. I'm not hearing anything about Christian Kirk, and he could easily be pushed to the wayside this year. I believe he's coming up on needing a new contract. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's pretty close to the end of the rookie deal, and yeah, I mean, look at the capital, right? They bring in AJ Green, one of the best of the past 10, 15 years. Right. They spent that same class they spent on Isabella, but now Rondell Moore. They go right back to it of a guy that you can put anywhere. So, yeah, there's a lot of stranger danger here with with Christian Kirk. And again, coming out, I really love the guy. I thought he was going to be anywhere and everywhere, but he's turned out to be a jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, and he's got, I mean, if you had him in best ball, you're happy. He had, I think, a 45-point game or something like that last season, but that's not going to help us too much in Dynasty unless you're playing Dynasty best ball. But he might be a player based on name value, based on almost a cult following during draft season. I mean, he had his own fan club. So that might be a player where you kind of pivot. You're probably not going to send him straight up for anything of value, but he could be valuable in a trade, especially somebody who's specifically seeking Christian Kirk. You might be able to actually get some value out of him before it's too late. If he hasn't demonstrated enough in this first contract, you can't expect a decent second one.
Yeah, and again, early career indicators. You know, it's that the big ceiling, the top 25, 30 season is not coming. And what you said about including in a deal, I think that's a valuable point to get something at least mentally, emotionally in a deal. No, because if you just drop him, he's the type of player will get picked up. The very next waiver run, someone will pick him up.
Absolutely.
However, you start doing a 2-for-1, you include that as the second piece, in something, and you offloaded him, but yet the other team got someone with a little bit of cachet still, but yet you were able to shed it and maybe clear up a spot for a backup running back or someone of interest that you think there's a little more upward mobility this year.
And that works out great because if you're trying to get a deal done and they say, well, it's just not enough, and you don't want Christian Kirk really on your roster too terribly much anyways, that's a deal getter doner right there.
And you want to hold that 3rd round pick next year. You want to keep, those free roster spots of rookie picks. And you're just like, I don't want to move back from 2nd to 3rd. How about Christian Kirk? Right.
It's insane how much goes into the mental game of this. So let me take a moment, Chad, to fill everybody in on kind of what we're doing here. So we operate directly with the Football Guys email newsletter. So if you go over and subscribe to the Football Guys email newsletter, you're going to get a letter directly from Joe Bryant, owner of footballguys.com. And what we do is we just parse through that newsletter. We take all of the Dynasty notes from that newsletter and we bring it over here and say, okay, how's this going to affect your roster? So make sure that if you're going to follow along with the show, or if you have any hopes of following along with the NFL news without going through 1,000 Google hits, then go over to footballguys.com, subscribe to the email list. So now
I would say as a Dynasty player myself in a bunch of leagues, again, I'm definitely in the typically absorbing a ton of information on my own, but there's tons of stuff every single week that I click through. I read the Football Guys email every day as a consumer, just on that side, because you're going to miss something. You're bound to miss something, whether it's your Twitter list, whether it's 2 or 3 different apps you follow for news. But this is the catch-all so that you don't miss anything. And I will say, in August coming up here, that's really the time with a lot of training camp reports at Football Guys. But that stuff makes it into the news email as well. You don't want to miss any of this.
And I've tried not subscribing, following all of the beat reporters for every team. That's brutal to try to follow, man, especially when you're following so many people already with Dynasty content, all the other content you consume. Trying to keep up with those beat reporters, it's insane.
Yeah, it probably take you an hour a day to go through all of that, and then again, you can read an email in 5-10 minutes. So clean up, and I always translate it to how many trade angles could you explore in your Dynasty leagues in the saved amount of time, or how much looking at the waiver wire and optimizing those final roster spots. So keep that in mind. You want to optimize every minute you have.
Absolutely, 2 true consumers here. So we're going to talk about the Patriots, Chad. We talk about the Patriots every week. It's not my fault. Actually, it's Joe's fault. He does the newsletter. But I'm a Cam Newton guy, and it's starting to seem like it's going to get tougher and tougher for him to work it out. So the training camp battle between QB Cam Newton and rookie first-round pick Mac Jones will be a true quarterback competition, according to Mike Giardi of NFL Network. That's actually kind of important to me because it doesn't seem like that was the narrative until right about now. So what do you think about that, Chad?
Yeah, well, first round quarterbacks, they don't sit often,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and
Yeah.
if they do sit, a lot of times it's because the starter is hot, right? I mean, we saw that a little bit with Ryan Fitzpatrick in Miami, a little bit. We saw that with Patrick Mahomes as Alex Smith was guiding a playoff team. So, but that is not the norm. I mean, there's going to be pressure. I've talked about the microwave kind of sense here of quarterbacks used to sit. You used to have allegiance to a first round quarterback for basically the whole rookie deal. No. Dikembe Mutombo, no, not here anymore. Because it's really a couple years. I think we're going to see a little more Josh Rosen type situations in the next 5 years of, hey, we just don't think this is the guy. It may save the coach and the front office's job to say, nope, we just got this wrong. And we need to reset and not waste time. So with Mac Jones, I fully expect by midseason, unless they are above 500, trending towards the playoffs, I'm trying to imagine. I think last year we kind of saw a good Cam Newton. Now, I know they didn't have the weapons, but I just think this is a two drastically different looking offenses depending on who the quarterback is. And talking about the running backs, I think we're doing that a little later in the show, that I think you should have a quarterback rooting interest here based on what your dynasty assets are across your teams. But I would say with Cam Newton, he didn't have the weapons last year. They added a truckload in terms of free agency across the board, wide receivers, tight ends, that this gives him a shot to not drift into, quarterback 25 plus, where it's just like, oh, you're irrelevant, and kind of in Superflex as well. Like you're just not really on the board here. I am pretty excited about Mac Jones to run an offense more so than Cam Newton, getting through his reads, but Cam Newton provides the rushing factor. So I do think he will be better than last year just because of the weapons.
Chad, you hit a good hint there. Let me bring in the whole offense for the Patriots, and then we'll riff on that for a minute because so in a recent interview on SiriusXM, Mike Reese from ESPN stated that Patriots running back Damien Harris is their running back one, and it's pretty decisive. So what you hinted at there is that I think, so you're saying Mac Jones is going to be the quarterback eventually, and it's going to look a lot different for those pass catchers. So Chris and I have riffed on that for a little bit. This whole offense is dirt cheap. And why should they be with Mac Jones? Unless you just think he's really terrible. I mean, which is fair. I wasn't a huge fan of Mac Jones, but I also was just a big fan of the rest of the quarterbacks in the class. Sans Zach Wilson, I guess I'm lukewarm, but I still think that Mac Jones was a first-round talent. Obviously wasn't the third overall talent. Maybe wasn't even a mid-first talent, but he's going to start eventually anyways. And hopefully Cam Newton can keep him on the sideline, because I think Cam Newton did decent, but he's probably not gonna.
Yeah, again, first rounder's going to play. And Mac Jones, you have to respect, this is a really interesting dynasty angle, because when you see Josh Allen, we saw this a few years ago. I'm not saying Mac Jones is Josh Allen, but what you have to do is the mid-first and higher, the first half of round one, that pedigree is significant at the quarterback position. A lot of times you get guys, in the last few picks of the round to get that fifth-year option, but top 15, top 16 is significant here. So they obviously thought that he was worthy of going in that zone, and you're going to get a lot of allegiance, even if it's just a couple years and, multiple chances. And Mac Jones was kind of viewed as pro ready, right? I mean, in terms of like a lot of not the mobility part. I do think he's a little underrated. Not that he's going to run for 200 yards a year, but I don't think he's going to be Phillip Rivers. I think he offers a little bit more than that when he can get out.
Maybe Baker Mayfield-esque?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe 10 yards per game, something like that, but enough to at least hang. But I think the running backs are really the interesting story, because with Cam Newton, who's been one of the highest rushing ratio guys, if you look at his fantasy production splits, that the goal line, they're going to run power. They're going to rewind like 1950s college. Like this is, so I know that that's good from an NFL sense, but it stinks if you're a Damien Harris owner. So if you own Damien Harris, if you own Ramondre Stevenson, if you own any part of this run game, I think you want Mac Jones under center. And it may be, we saw a good Damien Harris, and yet what did we see? Empty yardage, no touchdown. He'd have like 16 carries, 95 yards, look good. but he had 9.5 points because he didn't catch the ball and didn't get a touchdown.
He gets to play between the 20s.
And that's rough. So that would be my biggest point is you may have early season buying opportunities for the running backs, including Damien Harris, because Cam Newton's still under center. He's siphoning, 2 touchdowns over 3 games and things like that, where there's just not much to go around. But if it changes over to Mac Jones, I'm a lot more bullish on the running backs getting traditional usage and traditional production.
Sure. And we had a short news week, so we can actually break this down. I wanted to discuss the players specifically that I think you should be targeting. And just pretend Mac Jones is starting week 1. That's what I've been doing. I don't think he's going to, but the mental exercise, the mental judo that you have to do to make sure that you go acquire the assets you need to require, it forces you to say, Mac Jones is going to start eventually. And even if it's a year out, Jonu's contract's 4 years. And I'm going off the top of my head, Jonu's 4, Henry's 3, Aguilar's 3, Aguilar's 2, Bourne's 3. So all of these assets that they added are multi-year contracts, and not much of them were funny money when they added it. I think these guys are going to have to stick around, and they're there for Mac Jones. They're not there for Cam. Even if Cam played well this year, he's not old. He's going to get a new contract somewhere else. He'd have to excel substantially this year to get another starting job, I'd imagine, but they weren't brought in for Cam Newton. So I think Hunter Henry becomes more of the receiving tight end. I mean, even in Tennessee, Jonu was phenomenal in real football. He was okay in fantasy, but we saw more Anthony Firkser, in the passing game. So Jonu might come and be the jack of all trades again, but Hunter Henry's a receiving tight end through and through. That's what he's going to do. He doesn't get that contract if he's not going to be a receiver because he's just not good enough in the other aspects. He is good, but he's not good enough for that top tier tight end money in any other aspect than receiving. And I always try to follow the money. That's just how I play this game. So I think that Hunter Henry is that receiving option. And Nelson Aguilar looks like he's going to have to be a bona fide wide receiver 1. Do you buy into that at all?
I think we're going to see probably a rotational, Aguilar's going to be a deeper threat, some yards after the catch. We kind of know what he is at this point, right? I mean, he's gone through some different iterations and different offenses, but I think they're trying to recreate, in my opinion, a little bit of that to follow the money, as you just said. And I think the interest level they had in multiple tight ends to really fix that, they double dipped last year on day 2. And neither one of those they must not be happy with either one, because let's go get free agents that have actually done something at this level. And so that would be the part for me that I think it's going to center. Now, I really wonder the ceiling of any individual player here would be my biggest question. Maybe that's why it's generally Dynasty tepid, just in the player valuations, because you say if they spread it around, if they're going to play, let's not call it ugly, if they're going to play it close. I mean, they were relatively spitting distance to the playoffs last year, and you watch some of these games, and it was kind of a struggle to watch, especially as a fantasy lens. You look at their
getting 11.
Yeah, they're trying to win 13-10. Their defense is playing inspired, and they're just not turning the ball over. They're punting the ball. So all this ugly stuff. The couple other points I was going to make about this is Sony Michel. I think he's closer to being a cut than someone who's threatening Damien Harris, whatever his upside
100%.
is. I think Ramondre Stevenson been one of my sneaky, round 3. You can typically get him, maybe even a little later round 3 if it's super flex or 2 quarterback. He profiles as the primary backup if Michel is not around. And then the other part would be Damien Harris. I've gotten some offers around my leagues for Harris, people trying to pick him up. His value's all over the place.
Yes.
So the first thing I would say is don't sell. I mean, again, you're talking about a day 2 running back with prototypical traits that has really not gotten a longer lens of starting. So that could absolutely, he's in his window right now to have it in 2021. And you could be selling right on the edge of that for, again, a fraction of what a lead running back that looks the part, he's already flashed a little bit, where we see other guys going for a first or top 25, 40 in startup drafts. Harris is not going there.
Right.
So I would say some of these recent trades I've seen of Harris, where he's being traded for these ancillary wide receivers, traded for the equivalency of a 22-second. Be really careful, because in season we know what a starting running back of the younger variety, he puts together a couple of good games, actually scores a touchdown every now and again. all of a sudden he's going to be worth a first easily. And again, that's if you didn't want to use him in your lineup and just roll.
I know the eye test makes people gag around here, but he looked quite good playing the old football last year as well. But if he's being priced with Sony Michel there, apparently going to eat into work, and Cam Newton starting, buy all day, because that's not going to be very long. If we even see that week one, we could see Mac Jones starting, Sony Michel cut, and who's in Damien Harris's way then? I'd argue that Sony's not in his way either way, even if he makes the roster. I just don't think he's shown enough. I don't think he stayed healthy enough. It's pretty unfortunate. Loved him as a prospect. Cam Newton gets tricky because, like we said, I mean, he can be utilized between the 20s all day, and it's not going to do much for us in fantasy, especially since James White, who is worth rostering, going to look probably pretty incredible with Mac Jones behind center. So another person that might be a good grab if you're a competitor as well.
I'm glad you brought that up. The James White's still around, and frankly, that's one of the reasons maybe we're, as a community, more tepid on Damien Harris. Is that what's the PPR ceiling here? 30 catches. Yep, I mean, it really has not been. James White has been the guy, and the fact that he didn't go over with Tom Brady or somewhere else is like Mac Jones is going to find him more than Cam Newton, and again, it's going to limit. I mean, you pretty much as a Damien Harris GM and a guy on your team, you're going to need him to go pushing 100 yards, be a half touchdown or higher per game guy to get into that top 24 mix. So always be thinking about what is the profile of him doing well. Any player, what does that look like based on the depth chart, based on how we kind of see things splitting out.
Yeah, we almost have to get Sig to let us go on the couch to talk about this one, because I really want to know what happened in the background for that James White free agency situation. Somebody had to be racing to get into James White's ear as soon as they knew that he wasn't going to resign, because why bring Gio to do exactly what James White would be doing in Tampa after you've already gathered Tom Brady's committee, and you don't bring in James White, you instead bring in Gio. The only weird thing is that Giovanni Bernard signed first. So did they just think Giovanni Bernard was better than James White?
Right.
I don't know.
Can I ask you about Tampa?
Value. Yeah, let
me ask you about Tampa, because I always go around the dial. I think it used to be a Football Guys series I did. Maybe we'll pull it back up. But looking at potential cut players of just these clogged depth charts, and you look at Tampa Bay, is Keyshawn Vaughn on the bubble?
He's gone.
Well, he's gone. He was a day 2 pick last year. I mean, they bring in Gio. You figure okay, he's going to make the team. You got Fournette, you got Ronald Jones. And here's part of it. Some people are still looking at Giovanni Bernard and go, his profile. Well, let's go back all the way back when they drafted Jeremy Hill. I mean, he was a lead back for a moment in time. He's been an injury away guy for basically his whole career, a good hurry up back. But I just don't know. Also, I would say if he gets 80 targets, I guess that wouldn't surprise me, but I don't know where they come from, because they're loaded everywhere. They're loaded at every single skill position depth chart. So I don't know where Gio fits. I've actually 25-man roster. I've moved on. I've cut him. It feels weird, but I don't know what the upside is here. Trading wise or in my lineup, what would this look like? And I can't tell the story. And Keyshawn Vaughn feels like did it really end that fast for a day 2 running back? That feels so surprising. But he did nothing last year, even when he was on the field.
So when Keyshawn Vaughn got in-game opportunity, he didn't excel at all. And then he finally got a feature role one game, and he got a concussion, unfortunately. So and it's so easy for Arians to sour on running backs. I mean, we can sit here and dig into all of the statistics that we want to, and then these real people are going to make real people decisions. And Bruce Arians makes the worst real people decisions sometimes, but then he wins Super Bowl. So does it really matter? If he doesn't like Keyshawn Vaughn, he's probably gone. And Giovanni Bernard is probably a cut candidate because he's not one injury away anymore. But if he's going to be in the James White role, it just makes it so strange. I mean, I would have to have a viable option that I'm picking up. I wouldn't drop Giovanni Bernard for Kylen Granson that we were talking about earlier.
Oh yeah, exactly.
But if there's somebody, that's a juicy option off the waiver wire, I will. He's definitely the 25th man off my roster, just because I can't explain what's going to happen. And if he gets 80 targets, I guess I got burned, but I can't tell you he will.
Well, keep in mind, 80 targets isn't even J.D. McKissic from last year, right?
Fair.
And McKissic was like a guy you could rotate in as your running back 2 in PPR. He had some running back 1 moments, but that's like the peak of peaks, right? I mean, I guess James White was another one where you just see, oh, it's pronounced enough. They have that magical year or magical stretch. And I guess for Gio, that would be the equation, right? The humongous number of targets, but there's only so many to go around. I mean, they go 4 or 5 deep at wide receiver. They got 2, 3 tight ends. OJ Howard's coming back. Fournette caught a bunch of balls. Yep. So that's the part, the equation of how many guys have to be out, or how much does he literally have to reincarnate James White? The one thing I would say about the roster spot strategy here for dynasty teams would be, you get the cautionary tale of, I got to keep Gio because of his name. You get into August, and we're actually going to have preseason. So when you get preseason and we start feeling out what the rotation is, who actually is the number 2 back or number 3 back, who's fading, who's rising, that once you get clarity on that, and Gio's still sitting there as running back 3-4 on a depth chart, be careful, because there's going to probably be some really cheap waiver wire level acquisitions that you can make for running back 2s. And that's where I think you have to really have a clear divide, unless it's 35-man roster and you're like, oh, well, Giovanni Bernard's a good player, so I'm just going to hold him. That's not what we're talking about. A lot of rosters are sub 30 and even 25-ish, where it's backup running backs only, and selectively few other running backs are really in consideration for you.
And I have a cautionary tale for the bottom of your rosters. I think you should be bullish on churning that roster. I mean, if you think that you should make a move and the bottom 2, 3 spots of your roster, you probably should just do it. Because if you have to think about it, then there's better options out there, and you just keep churning and churning, and you can land on somebody. So my cautionary tale is Kendrick Bourne. I mean, Kendrick Bourne went off for me in preseason DFS a few years ago. I picked him up on almost all my rosters. I've held him for so long because I feel like he's a quality receiver. But he just got the best case scenario in the world. What did I say earlier? I think he got a 3-year deal, and Aguilar only got 2. So he got serious money to go to the Patriots. Who's buying him from me? No one. No one would buy him from me, and I've held him for 3 years. I got the best case scenario. I basically won the medal, but what do I have?
Still, where are you? Where are you now? Exactly.
I could have churned and churned and churned. I mean, you end up with guys like Auden Tate or like Alan Lazard, and you just keep churning and churning, but eventually you're going to land on someone. I mean, Jacoby Myers would have been a good pickup last year. So if you just keep moving that roster, maybe you get burned every once in a while, but I got the best case scenario for a guy that I've held for 3 years. I'm never going to start Kendrick Bourne. I'm not going to be able to trade Kendrick Bourne. Why didn't I just churn the bottom of my roster?
What's funny is your lesson there is actually better than the lesson I learned. I learned a tragic one because I am Mr. Jeff Janis from years ago of just like, I drafted him, thought I was the smartest guy in the room in like 4th round of rookie drafts. And I was like, I got to hold this guy. He's a metric marvel. I love him. He played a little bit. Oh, Aaron Rodgers loves him. And just, you look up 3 years later and you think to yourself, how many roster churn weeks, moments, time periods did I miss out on? How many flip candidates, how many spot starters did I miss out on over the years, even if it's just 1 year? And that's why you kind of brought it up. I mean, you need to have a little liquidity on the back end of your roster, but also you need to cut out the allegiance, because if you start getting sticky with guys and saying, oh, well, I want to see them develop. Well, no, your roster 24 spot is not really a developmental. Taxi squad is developmental.
Right. Or just pick them up again later. Like,
I think we have this fear of like missing out, where you drop somebody. Here's your worry: you drop them, and that next week someone picks them up. You're like, oh, well, now I should have traded him to them. Well, there's a divided market. It doesn't always mean someone's going to give you something for them. They'll pick them up for free though, because it costs $1 or whatever. And then, but then you're worried that the very next week or that next GM that picks them up is going to hit big. They're going to turn into the next great thing. And then it's like poker, right? You remember the bad beats and not the big wins, not the hot heaters. You remember, sports bet gambling or whatever. I mean, you remember the parlay you almost hit on and you missed out by some, onside kick in the 2-minute drill. So the roster spot mindset thing, you really have to have different partitions. I always talk about different tiers of your roster, and that tier 3, the last tier, you've got to be pretty liquid so that you can take advantage of opportunities.
Right.
And you guys will be going over that with the news, over the next 4, 6, 8 weeks, because there's going to be a lot of opportunities with changing situations that, frankly, we didn't have the data points last year.
Yeah, they say everyone's got an ego in football. Everybody's got an ego in fantasy football too, and you're worried that as soon as you drop it, somebody smarter than you picks them up, and then they just run off with the success. I mean,
I'm sure you've seen this too in your leagues, right? Where you're worried that someone also might be sort of like, oh, Adam dropped him, but he had him. See, Adam had him. My roster isn't quite as good, so now I'm just going to go, when he drops someone, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to pay attention. Maybe pick that guy up.
That's another factor too. But so I have to bring it back to the Patriots for a second. This whole conversation that we've had talking about churning rosters, mentioning the entire offense, not once did we say N'Keal Harry. What on earth?
Oh, he's a rough one, man. He's one that, remember, it was Josh Jacobs versus N'Keal Harry.
For
101, 101, 102. And, man, N'Keal Harry, I will say, I am more analytics. I am more prospect profile than I am how did he run an 8-yard curl route and things like that. So Harry was one where I was like, he's got everything. Now, what he didn't have was, you get late in the first round, that's not quite the same as going top 10 or so. There is a divide. There's different tiers there. But point is, he went first round, and he was a really good prospect on paper. And he's going to turn out, he's on track. I mean, the lack of production so far, it puts him in rarefied air in a bad way.
Yep.
Let's turn that hemisphere over. Like he's looking upwards to new layers.
Curve.
Yeah, well, to be fair, Doxson actually showed a lot more. Like a lot of it with him was like,
wow,
does he want to? Yeah, no, he actually made some vertical plays, some high point stuff. Harry really, you could have a 1-minute highlight reel, and that's plenty of time for his multiple seasons. So yeah, I mean, Harry, you just said follow the money. They paid 4 guys in the passing game, and we know that they've struggled over the years drafting wide receivers. So this is just another chalk it up one, right? I mean, this is going to go back to, what is it, Aaron Dobson? I'm just going to pull another name. I mean, we've had a bunch of Patriot guys that haven't worked out. And Harry, dare I say, Laquan Treadwell. Like, he's trending heavily of like, he's going to get another situation. But he seems like a guy that, I don't know, he measured well, he tested well, and you get to the NFL and you just don't see it at all. Separation, anything that's notable at the position that makes you think he's anything but just a guy.
So I was a huge N'Keal Harry stan going into and actually thank goodness I made this rule. I have some rules for myself in Dynasty, and one was tie goes to the running back, because running back early production is just so much easier to flip. And if you get a good head start, then you can keep flipping your running backs for younger tier, lower running backs. And that's how you keep elite running backs on your team. They just get too expensive to acquire. So I started doing tie goes to the running back if it's close. That's how Josh Jacobs became my 101 instead of N'Keal Harry, thank goodness. The other day, so I have a narrative for myself, and I'll follow a narrative sometimes. He came in and struggled really bad. First of all, injury. Secondly, Tom Brady screaming at him, and just a generally tough offense to grasp, on top of the fact that he wasn't a separator anyways. And I was just the type of guy that was bullish and said, when did separation matter for him? Well, it didn't in college. He high pointed every ball. He won every 50-50 ball. I thought it would translate. It didn't. Turns out you have to be fast in the NFL. You have to run good routes. However, after Tom Brady leaves, hopefully he grasps the offense, but then he got Cam Newton, who, do we know what we really saw from Cam Newton? I think that Cam Newton has healed up over this offseason, just because I see no incentive for the Patriots to engage in this mutualistic relationship with Cam Newton for a second year and add money to it. Because if I'm the Patriots, what did you do for me to add money? I mean, I'll keep you because you won some games for us, but why add money? So I'm thinking Cam Newton's camp is saying, I got a whole offseason. I'm healthier now. Either you give me more money or I go somewhere else. So that tells me either he's going to get a Cam Newton that theoretically is healthier, or Mac Jones, who, if Mac Jones is decent, it's because he's accurate. That's what people say about Mac Jones. I don't know that I see it as much as other people do, but if Mac Jones is accurate, there you go. N'Keal Harry's your guy. He's going to win those balls.
Yep. And I would just say, like, Harry's a really frustrating career arc because he's finished
Yep.
outside the top 100 in points per game the first 2 years. I mean, that's a
Yep.
near death knell. These guys don't come back. It's not like he's only played 3 games. He's had some healthy stretches. He just has not looked the part. And one thing I would point to is I look at breakout rates a lot on how do they time up. And I know we used to have articles all the time, the year 3 breakout wide receiver. Harry's entering year 3. Now, the problem is he's coming from the depths, and they've replaced everything on that passing game, resculpted, and it almost feels like a mea culpa for them drafting Harry to begin with. I will point out, though, that they start out round 1 wide receivers being a top 24 hit 57% of the time for year 1, and it's still 35% entering year 3. So more of them are year 3 coming up than year 1 or 2. However, next year, if it doesn't happen, so that's top 24. I mean, let's try to wrap our brains around how top 24 happens for N'Keal Harry. It drops to 7%. Next year and beyond for a N'Keal Harry type profile. If he doesn't do it this year, it goes from 35% to 7%. So you got to be really careful. And now I know no one's paying for it. Basically, he's the cost of a roster spot. He's going to be dropped.
Yes.
He might be on waiver wires right now. I think what you're kind of saying, though, is let's see what happens, right? Isn't this a relatively liquid passing game? Everybody's new, kind of. Not Harry, but everybody's new. We might have a new quarterback, new design. Obviously, Brady wasn't there, but if Cam Newton's not there, that's all we have to go off of how they constructed things last year. So if everything's new, Operation Fresh Start, Harry has to know this is like basically your last chance. I mean, a 5th-year option like next offseason would be revelatory for him. So this is basically, if you're ever going to be in the quote-unquote best shape of your life, and like you should be heavily motivated by what they've done around you, saying, you're not the guy. These other guys might be that because we have no faith in you. So if he's going to trim down to 215 pounds, if he's going to develop chemistry, go over to Mac Jones's house, whatever he has to do, this has to be the year. And I think the interesting part with Harry is you're going to know right away. I think you're going to actually know in August. You don't even have to get to week 1 to know if he's on any sort of track. So I always like the clarity. We talked about the final roster spots. So the last thing on Harry I would say is at least you're going to get some good indicators one way or another. If he's dinged up with a hamstring, let's just write him off and cut him. Like he's going to get off to a slow start. But if he actually shows some promise, first round pedigree, these are the guys that could come back and actually hold some value for you or your league mates.
N'Keal Harry is the kind of thing where you get to week 3 and you're like, whatever happened to N'Keal Harry? And that's when you know it's over for him. I have a sad N'Keal Harry story in just a second, but if you've been listening to the show and you heard me talk about the FBG Player Championship on FFPC, and then you heard me talk about the email listing, but you're on your phone and you want to go over to the website, it might not look quite as great as the mobile app that we have. So if you want to go over to the mobile app, you can go ahead and download the Footballguys mobile app and get a lot of the same content that you get on the website, maybe a little better for your phone. So just keep that in mind. We do have a mobile app. Go check it out. And I just want to finish with my sad story, Chad. So the other day I went through this narrative that I just expressed to you about N'Keal Harry and how, and then you brought the numbers and I changed my mind. So the other day I went through this narrative with N'Keal Harry and I said, you know what? He's got to be close to free. People are trying to get rid of him anyways. Let me go try to acquire him. So I go over to my fantasy league and I type his name into the little search bar to see what rosters he's on and what leagues. I go type him in. I have him in 10 of 11 dynasty leagues. And the one league that I don't have him in, I'm not getting him. I tried, too expensive. So I'm unfortunately heavily invested in N'Keal Harry.
Well, you know how it goes in Dynasty is that the cheaper they are, like you can get a high market share of guys that are like 3rd round rookie picks when they're coming in, even 2nd. But, I mean, you can only have so much of, say, Najee Harris because you have to be in a really tight range of picks. But when guys get to the waiver wire, like I remember a few years ago, Malcolm Brown, like you can just walk through late August and you can pick him up in every league because he was just out there a ton. I think that was after they had already drafted Darrell Henderson or something like that. And he was the backup though. Brown was actually declared the backup. So the cheaper they are, you can get up to 50, 60, 75% ownership pretty quickly because but yet, you have startup drafts, you got guys that are actually meaningful capital, rookie draft, etc. It's going to be harder to get above, 30, 40% in reasonable fashion.
Yeah. How many times do you have to see a name late in a draft in a startup or on the waiver wire and think, oh, he's still here, before you just realize you're the one holding the bag for everybody else.
See, I love how you were talking about getting numb. Like when you get to the point, and you have him in 10 of 11, so you kind of control the spigot here. But in other player settings, maybe it's a John Ross, or maybe, like rewind the tape on certain players. But it's when you get to the point of seeing them available on the list and you literally just scroll past with your eyes. That's the moment when you know it's over. When Laquan Treadwell was not owned all the time, and all of a sudden he gets to the point of you just scroll right past. You're like, yeah, round one guy, dude can't move. We haven't seen much of anything. He's on his third team. And you just literally go right past him to maybe a backup tight end. Like he's not even a fixture element of decision-making anymore. That's when it's like I record a Happy Trails show, and it's always when I delete people from my database when I call them out. Here's what we remember about them. Here's a little bit about their profile. Happy Trails. See you later. Pardon the interruption style. And guys like Treadwell, I could totally see next March doing a Happy Trails to N'Keal Harry. But we're also talking about how we wouldn't be shocked if he comes back and he's relevant. Sure. Is that top 50? I mean, it doesn't take much to have this quote unquote best year yet. So.
Sure, but with a N'Keal Harry, it's like when you have him in 10 of 11 leagues, then it's really easy for that switch to flip in your head and say, oh, he'll probably do good on a second team. Well, what's that range of outcome? Probably less than 1%, 0.5%.
And we're talking ancillary wide receiver.
Yeah, exactly. So almost impossible. So if you guys enjoyed listening to the show today, this is Chad Parsons from the Dynasty Show on footballguys.com. Chad, thank you very much for filling in today. We'll get your normal doses of Chris Allen next week. So for Chad Parsons, I'm Adam Wilde. This is the Dynasty newsletter at footballguys.com. Thanks for tuning in.